within a year, the Iranian regime was going to become untouchable. It was going to have enough ballistic missiles and a well-fortified ballistic missile industry that no one would be able to threaten it with military force. But the British obsession with international law is something to be studied. I get the impression that a country that has not fought a war of survival in 3 generations has basically outsourced decisions about life and death and security to international law. But I think there was a tendency among certain European left-wing elites to believe that international law has bite and is going to come and save you. And it's not going to. And when the Iranian leaders look up at the sky now, they're seeing Israeli fighter jets, not manuals on international law. Because it's clear that Britain is not able to make foreign policy decisions purely on the basis of national interest without thinking about what the backlash is going to be from an increasingly emboldened extremist movement on the streets.
Hello and welcome to another GB News Originals interview. I'm Will Kingston. My guest today is former Israel government spokesman Eylon Levy. Eylon, welcome to the show.
Hello, Will. Good to be here.
It's good to be with you. You were just saying off air that it's been a sleepless night.
It is. We had 3 missile sirens in the space of about an hour and a half between 2 o'clock and 3:30 in the morning. So it meant hitting the hay and then waking up from a siren, running downstairs into the basement with all the neighbors, getting the all clear, going back upstairs, going to bed for 10 minutes, waking up again from a siren, running downstairs, getting the all clear, going back up, sleeping for another few minutes, going downstairs. And then to top it off, after trying to sleep in a little bit, we had another siren at 10:30. So I hope we're going to get through this, through the whole of this interview. You also said off air, it's horrible, but it's something that you're used to. But Israelis are really determined to stick through it this time to make sure that this is the last time, because after 2 years of war, we're determined to finish the job and make sure that the Iranian regime can menace us no longer. We are absolutely not willing to enter a new reality of another round of conflict with Iran every 6 months, like we got used to another round of conflict with Hamas because we didn't finish off the job there. So people are sleepy, but morale is high.
Good. Well, 2 years of war, some would put it in a longer historical context and say this is 47 years of war since this awful regime came to power. We'll get to that historical context, but to start, and we will start with a wide lens, what have been your chief reflections since the intervention or the war began on the 28th of February?
Look, we're watching history in the making, and the way that the tables have turned in the Middle East is truly breathtaking. I mean, remember where Israel was 2 years ago. We were surrounded by Iran's proxy armies that were waiting for an order to attack simultaneously and destroy Israel. That is why the Iranian regime built its ring of fire of Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis and the militias in Iraq and its fearsome ballistic missile arsenal. And then everything went wrong. Hamas invaded on October 7th with acts of brutal slaughter, hostage-taking, and they spectacularly mistimed because the rest of the Iranian regime did not join in as they were expecting. And it means that in 2 years, Israel has been able to shave down Hamas, cut Hezbollah down to size, reduce the Houthis to such weakness that even they haven't intervened on the side of the Iranians now, taken out much of Iran's nuclear project, ballistic missile capabilities, and air defenses, to a point that Israeli planes now control the skies of Tehran, and they achieved that within less than 24 hours. The US-Israeli coalition is systematically destroying the Iranian regime's ability to continue waging its war of aggression in the Middle East, going after the nuclear sites, the ballistic missile launchers, the ballistic missile factories, the instruments of repression of the people of Iran, their support for the proxy armies, so that they can no longer threaten not just Israel, but the whole Middle East. Right now, the rate of missile fire towards the UAE and Qatar and Oman and Saudi Arabia has gone down in the last few days because Israel is bombing the missile launchers. So you said, let's look at this within a historical perspective of 47 years. Let's look at it within a historical perspective of 77 years, that the Israel that was invaded on the day it declared independence by the whole Arab world is now keeping that Arab world safe from Iranian ballistic missile launches. I mean, history really has a habit of working in some extraordinary ways.
Why did the Iranian regime just start spraying missiles across the Arab states when it was a intervention from Israel and the US?
The Iranian regime is completely out of control. This morning we saw news that having fired at the UAE, Saudi, Qatar, Kuwait, Jordan, Israel, of course, potentially Cyprus too, they're now lashing out in the other direction, and a drone hit Azerbaijan. It seems what the Iranians are trying to do is to browbeat the Americans into submission by putting pressure on their allies, by inflicting such a cost on the people of the UAE and Bahrain and Saudi Arabia that they will go to the United States and beg it to de-escalate and to back off. That's how they want to survive this war. And I think they've really miscalculated, because the fact that they are shooting drones and missiles at will at malls and hotels and oil facilities has shown everyone in the Middle East that this is a truly dangerous regime. And if this is what it's doing with a stockpile of 2,500 missiles, just imagine what it would do with 8,000 missiles and ballistic and nuclear weapons. So they're trying to pressure America through its allies, but it's backfiring, because the Arab states are now saying, well, we reserve the right to exercise force as well to protect our interests. There's only so long we're going to be sitting ducks here as we continue to absorb these Iranian attacks. I do think, a personal prediction, prophecies given to fools, as we say, that the possibility of Gulf states intervening is quite high, because the Iranians have moved to what they're calling decentralized mosaic defense. What does that mean? They knew that their command structure would be completely obliterated in the first few minutes of war. So they've built their army in a way that is now operating as dozens of independent mini armies, not necessarily taking orders from the center. And that means that it's designed to work in a way that doesn't necessarily have an off switch. And if they're going to continue lashing out at Arab states, it is quite likely that they too will say, okay, well, now we have to finish the job of this Iranian regime. The Israelis and Americans started it, but now we're going to have to step in and defend our citizens as well.
The counter argument, or I guess the counter scenario, is that missile defense systems are incredibly expensive, and defense missiles are running low for some states. The war is not popular in the US. I think the last poll I saw, about 20 to 25% of the population are supportive of it. A combination of economic pressure and the unpopularity of the war in both the Arab states and the US means that pressure on Trump will be so severe that he will cut and run. What do you say to that argument?
Look, we can talk about the domestic aspect, and I think that that's what makes this an extraordinary and historic decision by President Trump. He's not doing something that is popular domestically or internationally. He's doing something that he knew would be domestically and internationally difficult, and he's doing it anyway, and that's because he understands that it's right. That's leadership. Really, it's different from other leaders who've tried to sweep the problem under the rug, push it into the long grass. We're hearing all the Obama apologists saying, we had a deal that would have prevented Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. No, you didn't. You had a deal that would have placed temporary restrictions on the Iranian nuclear project that would have expired by now, and given Iran billions of dollars, such as that when the deal expired, it would have been so rich and powerful that it would have been untouchable and could have raced towards nuclear weapons anyway. And President Trump is saying, I'm not kicking the can down the road. We have to deal with this here and now before it begins too big to deal with. But Will, you mentioned a really important point here about the interceptors being so much more expensive than the missiles themselves. That is a reason why this war had to happen, not why it needs to end early. I'll explain. Secretary Rubio explained in a stakeout to the press that the Iranian regime was approaching a point of strategic invulnerability. What did he mean? They were manufacturing 100 ballistic missiles a month. The West cannot manufacture 100 interceptors a month, and they're much more expensive to manufacture. So the Iranians are making more missiles than the West is making interceptors. They're cheaper than the West's interceptors, and they're building them in factories that are being fortified underneath mountains. That meant that within a year, the Iranian regime was going to become untouchable. It was going to have enough ballistic missiles and a well-fortified ballistic missile industry that no one would be able to threaten it with military force. And everyone who says you have to negotiate, well, negotiations are only as good as the force that backs them up, as the threat of or else if you don't negotiate. And at that point, the West would have had absolutely no cards. Steve Witkoff is saying the Iranians walked into the room and their first line was, we know we have enough nuclear material for 11 nuclear bombs. That's our starting point. If they did that after there is no credible military threat, because it would have been prohibitively damaging to try to destroy the nuclear project by force, then they would have been able to build a nuclear weapon whenever they wanted. So that was part of the thinking for the Americans of why this war had to happen now and couldn't be pushed off or postponed for another year, knowing that knowing the Iranians were bleeding them dry in the negotiations and trying to buy time. With every day that passed, as Iran made cheaper and more lethal missiles and imported game-changing strategic weaponry from China, we can look at the global aspect as well, the balance of power was shifting to the Iranians in a way that meant that they would soon become untouchable, and there's nothing anyone could do about their nuclear weapons program.
Notwithstanding the immediacy of that threat, the left, or the favourite response from the left is that this is an illegal war. They reach for the international law rationale to basically say that the US and Israel should not have done this. I've got my own pretty strident views on international law, but I'll let you tee off first. Why is this an illegal conflict?
You know, sometimes I wonder whether the last 2 years were all a dream. The fact is that a state of international armed conflict already exists between Iran and Israel. It exists because Iran has been waging a multi-front war against Israel for years. It exists because the Iranian regime is determined to bring death to Israel, and it is openly sworn to Israel's destruction, annihilation, obliteration, extermination. I mean, you pick your synonym. If the Iranian regime wanted to end the state of international armed conflict, it was welcome to make peace with Israel, but it didn't want to because it wants us all dead. And that means that the relevant legal framework is not what lawyers call, I'm going to get a bit boring and technical here, it's not what lawyers call the jus ad bellum, the justification for beginning hostilities. The hostilities are already happening. Iran has been attacking Israel for the last 2 years, kinetically, physically, directly. It's the jus in bello. It's the laws that govern war once it's already happening. And that means you have to evaluate this on the basis of proportionality, distinction, military necessity, precaution. But to pretend that an armed conflict wasn't already happening is simply detached from reality. But you know what? Well, I think that the international law question is secondary, and it's not that interesting. Because the fact is, these strikes are right because they just saved the world from a nuclear Iran. And if international law is such that a regime can race towards nuclear weapons, and there is nothing you can do to stop it until those nuclear missiles are already in the air, then it's not fit for purpose. And I think there's a problem in the West, and really, look, international law is important, okay? But the British obsession with international law is something to be studied. I get the impression that a country that has not fought a war of survival in 3 generations has basically outsourced decisions about life and death and security to international law. And when the whole ecosystem of international law, of NGOs and UN, has been taken over by radical fair-left activists, you end up with a scenario where international law is whatever these radical anti-left activists say it is, and what they say it is always whatever makes Israel into the bad guys. That is no way to run your national security. It is no way to make decisions on life and death. So as it happens, yes, the strikes are obviously legal. Israel is taking action in the context of an existing armed conflict to prevent an enemy that says it wants to annihilate us from developing the weapons with which to annihilate us. But it's also not the most important question. The most important question is, have these strikes made the world safer? And by eliminating the threat of a nuclear Iran, they absolutely have.
I agree with that framing. And I think the international law question is interesting to the extent that it shines a light on the way that the ruling class in both the United Kingdom and continental Europe think. The way that you framed the international law as effectively a way to abrogate responsibility to make decisions, to have any sort of moral clarity or conviction, I think is the right one. I think it is the way that Keir Starmer views the world. You grew up in the United Kingdom. How do you reflect on this dithering response from the Starmer government following the 28th of February?
Look, I understand the Iranian regime has Britain in a bind. On the one hand, it seems to be trying to bait Britain into the war with the attacks on RAF Akrotiri, whether they came from Iran directly or came from Hezbollah, it doesn't really matter. On the other hand, Britain knows that if it enters the war, it has a Khomeinist fifth column inside that will bring chaos inside Britain. Britain knows that Iran is one of the most destabilizing factors that has been behind potentially lethal attacks on dissidents on UK soil. Problem is, I don't think the UK has any understanding of the costs of either of those choices. Namely, what happens if you allow the enemy to keep pushing boundaries and brush it under the rug and say that didn't happen and we'll outsource our security to others? That the British discussion of national security sometimes seems to take place within a bubble that is completely oblivious of reality. Look, I'll give you an example. The chair of the House of Commons Foreign Affairs Committee, Emily Thornberry, tweeted the other day in what must have been one of her most viral tweets: wars are only ever resolved by negotiations. And therefore, Britain's job is to support negotiations. I mean, have you forgotten to what Britain owes its freedom? Has Europe forgotten what it had to do to achieve freedom in 1945 and to sustain it since then? Wars don't end with negotiations. They end when one side wins. There is nothing to negotiate with an Iranian regime that is sworn to the destruction of Israel, of the United States, of other Gulf allies. And so it's just truly an abnegation of reality. And look, I'll give you another example of how the British foreign policy discussion is taking place within a fantasy land. And it's really sad. It's really sad as someone who grew up in the UK to see a country that used to be a great power succumb to true mediocrity. I saw Prime Minister Starmer, I'll bring up this quote, speaking in the House of Commons for what I think was the third or fourth time that he wanted to be absolutely clear that the UK was not involved in these strikes, which is a legitimate choice, whatever, we can talk about that. And he says, here we go, I'll bring you the quote. You'd think it's parody. We believe that the best path for the region is through a negotiated settlement, one in which Iran agrees to abandon its aspiration to develop a nuclear weapon and ceases destabilizing activities across the Middle East. Okay, amazing. We would love to have a negotiated settlement in which the Islamic Republic of Iran decides to stop being evil and stop exporting terrorism and trying to build a nuclear weapon. But it doesn't want to do that. So what's your plan B? We in Israel exist in a reality of realpolitik. It's clear what your enemies want, and sometimes you have to use force in order to deter threats and sometimes to remove those threats. And for Britain to stick to, well, the best plan is a magic solution without talking about what the plan B is and what you're going to do about the bad guys if they decide they don't want to change stripes and be good is depressing. I mean, I've seen the jokes on social media, Stella talking to the Iranians saying, please stop attacking our forces. It's against international law. You're not allowed to do that. But again, just a general detachment from realpolitik, from shifting power balances geopolitically, and a very lazy attempt to outsource decisions of life and death to international law that is whatever a bunch of lefty activist lawyers say it is.
Yeah, I think the comments from Thornberry and Starmer encapsulate the two great problems with how the modern left sees the world. Number one is a profound historical ignorance, particularly when you look at the comments from Emily Thornberry, but also this failure to appreciate that not all countries, not all cultures see the world the same way, that we do in a Western liberal democracy. I remember we spoke about a year ago, 18 months ago perhaps, on Gaza, and we talked about this, and it is immensely frustrating when you have leftists who just assume that negotiation will work with a theocratic death cult that has fundamentally different aims and has a fundamentally different way of seeing the world than a USA or a UK or Australia, which is why I imagine negotiation has not worked for decades and decades.
Right, and there's an irony that it's precisely the people who claim to respect and celebrate diversity the most who fail to understand genuine diversity of thought and ideological worldview. The people who believe the most in diversity who also believe that universal values are held universally. People do not understand that the Iranian regime really means it when it says it wants to destroy the state of Israel. It's not a metaphor. It's not abstract. Physically, fire and brimstone. And the Iranian regime was willing to immiserate, oppress, impoverish its own population in order to achieve nuclear weapons with which to do that and with which to blackmail the West. And the constant insistence on negotiations is detached from the reality of the dynamics of negotiations. Look, everyone wants to negotiate. A negotiated solution is best, but when you go into a negotiation, your hand is only as strong as your best alternative to your ability to walk away and what you can do unilaterally. So if you're going into negotiations and while you're negotiating, the other side is improving its military option by building enough ballistic missiles and drones that it will be strategically invulnerable and can walk away from the table in a year, build nuclear weapons, and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. Those aren't negotiations. That's appeasement. And it's especially sad to see from European leaders who should know what the history of appeasement is, which, you know what, might have made sense when Western European countries were too weak to confront Hitler before 1939. They're definitely not too weak to confront the Iranian regime now. But understand that when you have an authoritarian regime that is pursuing game-changing weapons that will threaten your security, you don't just keep feeding the crocodile while it buys time and improves its hand. So you just can't look at negotiations outside the reality of the military power that underpins either side's ability to walk away from negotiations. But I think there was a tendency among certain European left-wing elites to believe that international law has bite and is going to come and save you. And it's not going to. And when the Iranian leaders look up at the sky now, they're seeing Israeli fighter jets, not manuals on international law.
Yeah. I only half jokingly said on Twitter the other day that if you think that Donald Trump violated international law, call up the international police and ask them to arrest Donald Trump and see how far that gets you. It is a series of principles without an enforcement mechanism. I don't think it can actually even be called law as such for that very reason.
Look, I saw the Prime Minister of Canada saying, Israel didn't go to the United Nations. Why would it go to the United Nations? To get permission from Russia and China in order to eliminate an existential threat from one of their allies, and an existential threat that Russia and China are empowering in order to bog the United States down in the Middle East and give them a free hand to challenge the international order. Just a complete detachment of the existing shifting geopolitical power balance. It's really staggering.
I would say that the UN is systemically anti-Semitic. Would you go that far?
Yes. Yes, it is clear to me in the last 2 years that UN officials have been openly taking the side of Hamas and the Iranian axis in this war, whether spreading the genocide hoax or the starvation hoax or pressuring Israel to end its offensive against Hamas and give it whatever it wanted just days after Hamas abducted Israeli hostages as sex slaves. They have not given Israel a moment's grace, a moment's benefit of the doubt. It's clear that there are officials there, such as Francesca Albanese, the special rapporteur on Palestine, who calls Israel an enemy of humanity and the incarnation of pure evil, who have truly twisted beliefs about Jews and about Israel, and are openly gunning for Israel's enemies. In the days since this war began, not a single UN official has condemned the Iranian regime for firing ballistic missiles with cluster submunitions at Israeli cities. And as far as I'm concerned, they can all go to hell.
Agreed. We will return to the geopolitics momentarily, but I just want to keep you in the depressing morass of British politics a little longer. There is another element to the Starmer, or what that underpins the response of the Starmer government, and that is the Gordon and Denton and the growing influence of the Muslim vote in the United Kingdom. We now know that the demographics of the UK are shifting rapidly, and that is particularly the case when it comes to a growing number of Islamic voters, and Islamic voters that are willing to vote along sectarian lines and are becoming increasingly coordinated together. And we saw that in the Gordon and Denton by-election. This led to Donald Trump saying the other day that he thinks that Starmer may be influenced by the Muslim vote. I personally think everything that Starmer does now should be viewed through the prism of the Muslim vote. How concerned should the UK be about becoming a balkanized sectarian society?
I mean, look, Birmingham, England's second city, is on course to have a Muslim majority by the end of by the middle of the century, isn't it? And if current trends continue, within our lifetime, Britain will have a similar proportion of its population being Muslim as Israel does. And the question is, are you going to integrate these people into the proud British civic tradition, or are you going to end up with sectarian politics? The fact is, Britain basically has an Islamist party already. That is what happened in the last parliament with the Gaza MPs, the Gaza independents, people voting on the basis of Gaza, and the Green Party increasingly. I mean, they're green because they're Islamists. The deputy leader of the Greens, Mohsin Ali, openly celebrated the October 7th massacre as it happened. And I don't care that they have a gay Jewish fig leaf as the leader of the party who is willing to cover that up and to collaborate and collude with their destructive values. That's the reality. And it is deeply concerning because it's clear that Britain is not able to make foreign policy decisions purely on the basis of national interest without thinking about what the backlash is going to be from an increasingly emboldened extremist movement on the streets. That is not just the Muslim population in the UK. So I'll say two things. First of all, not all of them are extremists, of course, although all of them are cowed by the extremists. And I know that many people who, within the Jewish community, who've tried to do interfaith work have basically given up because of the pressure not to collaborate with Zionists, okay? Even those who are willing to talk and to reach out across community lines are terrified of the extremists in their own ranks. And it's infected many of the right native population of the UK as well, who've been going along with this third worldism radical politics as well, to the point where you have protests on the streets of London every week, basically taking the side of the Iranian axis, people marching in support of what was originally prescribed as a terrorist organization, Palestine Action. And when that happens, they'll get the support of a man who now leads the second most popular party in the United Kingdom, the Green Party, which is astonishing given that the first most popular party is the Reform Party, which has a handful of seats in the Commons, and you can fit them in a minivan. And now the UK's old two-party system seems to be collapsing under the weight of multipolarity. It doesn't augur well for the United Kingdom and its tradition of stability and decency and normalcy and keeping everything under control. But Britain is clearly going through some very serious upheavals.
Yeah, I agree with that. So you've got the Islamo-Communist Alliance who are pushing within countries like the United Kingdom and the United States against Israel. There is another group, though, that I want to get to, and I would say that this group is more prevalent in the United States than it is in the United Kingdom, and that is the horseshoe right. It is typified by commentators like Candace Owens, like Tucker Carlson, increasingly, unfortunately, like Megyn Kelly. How do you feel about that group that basically is saying that the United States is now just a pawn for Israel, that Israel is ultimately the aggressor, Israel is at fault, and have taken on an increasingly, I would even say, not just anti-Zionist, but anti-Semitic stance in recent months and years against Israel and its people?
The woke right, or woke Reich, is a growing lunatic movement that is trying to foment political violence in the West. It is an extremely dangerous movement. That's just the tip of the iceberg of the conspiracy theories that have been swiveling online, to the point that it's you mentioned the horseshoe. The extreme right is now indistinguishable from the far left. The people saying that the drone attack on RAF Akrotiri was Israel on the left are the same people as the ones on the right saying that Israel is the one bombing Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates in order to drag the United States into war. It's ridiculous. It's dangerous. And I hope that President Trump spits this movement out and understands that it has no part in the movement that he's trying to build on the legacy that he's trying to lead, or it's going to lead the United States down a very, very dark rabbit hole.
Yeah, well, I noted the other day that Piers Morgan is now getting sued by Natasha Horstoff for his comments in an interview with her, and I won't pass comment other than to say that Natasha is a friend of the Saturday Five, the show that I do, and I'm fully supportive of her efforts there. We will.
It'll be the biggest trash since Deborah Lobstadt and David Irving.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. We will get to the big question of what happens next, and trying to look ahead, which I think is where so many people now are uncertain. Before we do, I just want to look at the broader geopolitical context outside of the Middle East, particularly to Russia and China. I must admit I haven't seen the article yet, but I noted on Twitter that The Spectator this week is running with a cover story that says that Donald Trump's the ultimate goal of Donald Trump when it comes to this conflict is not necessarily Iran as much as it is China. How does China play into this story? That's right, China.
Look, increasingly, we are seeing an axis that is threatening the Western order. Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. And it's no coincidence that they are threatening the four countries on whose security the whole Western order relies, namely Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan, and South Korea. If those countries fall, that's the end of the Western order as we know it, that these are revanchist powers that are determined to rewrite the rules. Now, China has been supplying game-changing weapons to Iran. Just recently, Iran and China were on the point of signing a deal for Iran to receive hypersonic weapons that would have given it supremacy in the Straits of Hormuz and allowed it to down American ships. And that's why America is now downing the entire Iranian Navy. It's clear that China has been helping Iran develop cheap drones and missiles, which can be produced much more quickly and much more cheaply than the interceptors, in order to bog America down and distract it from challenging America's interests elsewhere. So there are essentially two battles going on now. There is Israel versus Iran, which is a question about security in the Middle East, and that's embedded within a broader geopolitical battle between the United States and China, because America wants to knock out Iran as a threat to America so that you then don't have China able to invade Taiwan, push boundaries in the Far East, knowing that its ally Iran has American interests completely at their mercy. So there's a bigger game, and it's a bigger game that world leaders completely overlook when they reduce everything to is this compliant with international law, and did you or did you not consult the United Nations?
Some people wouldn't give Trump that credit to say that he thinks in terms of grand strategy, and it's just more that he is instinctive and will respond to situations as and when they occur. Do you think there is actually a conscious, deliberate, broader plan from the Trump administration in that sort of those grand strategy terms that you just laid out?
I do. I think it's a mistake to think of President Trump as acting impulsively. Just because he talks like this with sharp hand movements and seems impulsive. President Trump has made a decision to beef up the American military, to go after those directly threatening American interests, to throw his weight around on the world stage. And it is clear that he sees China as America's number one geopolitical threat. That was not obvious during President Trump's first term when he started going after China, and it looked like, what is that? Why is he going after China? Because the left and the internationalists still believed that by enmeshing China within a system of rules of international law and relationships, it's going to play ball, and we're in denial about how China was trying to threaten the Western-led order. So I think from Trump's first term, it's been clear he sees China as the number one geopolitical threat to the United States, and other issues of grand strategy have to be understood within America trying to navigate that as the century-long battle for hegemony.
Okay, what next? So a lot of people, in fact, most people in the United Kingdom and the United States would be broadly in the position of saying, well, we think that this is a awful, disgusting regime, and no one except for Islamists and nutcases are shedding tears for the death of the Ayatollah Khomeini and the mullahs. At the same time, many people have fears for the instability that this region has caused. They are worried about another forever war. They know that it is impossible, or almost impossible, to get regime change from the air alone. And they think that this is, on balance, the wrong thing to do because it will lead to yet more conflict and yet more Western interventionism with no end in sight. How do you respond to that?
You're right. Regime change can't be done from the air alone. But as it happens, the Iranian people have tried many times before on the ground to overthrow their regime, and they were slaughtered in their tens of thousands of the streets because no one came to save them. Look, there are two issues here. One, the most important thing is to eliminate the Iranian regime's ability to wage aggression. When this war ends with the destruction of Iran's nuclear program, ballistic missile industry, and navy, the world will be a safer place because the regime that pursued a vision of imperialism across the Middle East and destabilized its neighbors in order to destroy some of its neighbors will no longer be able to threaten them. And the world will be a safer place, and everyone should say thank you to the US-Israeli coalition. But ultimately, there will never be peace in the Middle East as long as the grand civilization of Iran is controlled by a fundamentalist, theocratic, what Rubio calls a lunatic regime that is committed to death and martyrdom. Now, this is not Iraq and this is not Afghanistan. The Iranian people have tried many times before to overthrow the regime. Most recently, a few weeks ago, that was an attempted revolution, and the Iranian regime slaughtered them in the streets. What happened? Well, the regime still had a monopoly on violence. What Israel is doing now, by bombing the IRGC and the Basij and the intelligence ministry in Iran, is bombing the Iranian police state in a way that will give the people a chance to rise up and claim their future again. It's changing the balance of power within Iran. So the people who've already been trying to overthrow the Ayatollahs and create a free Iran will have a free chance to do it. Now, ultimately, the future of Iran is for the Iranian people to decide. Only they can do it, and no one's going to parachute in a leader from the outside. But the best possible option would be an Iranian regime that is so compromised. I mean, so compromised to the point that the Financial Times had a report about how Israel had hacked all the traffic lights inside Tehran to know exactly when the supreme leader's cars were moving. So compromised, where no one will want positions of senior leadership because they know that Israel and the United States can assassinate them at will using missiles launched from outer space, that they will defect, that they will agree to hand over to a democratic transition inside Iran, and that Iran can be at peace with its neighbors. And that's exactly, Will, what the Iranian exiles around the world want. It's why last a few days ago, you had Iranians in London singing the Israeli national anthem outside Downing Street. It's why Iranians in Athens and Madrid have been laying flowers outside the Israeli embassies there to say thank you for killing the dictator, because they can't go home and they're waiting to take their country back and build a free Iran. So that would be the best the best case scenario, that this means the end of the regime because it realizes how vulnerable it is and because its monopoly on force is destroyed.
Yes, there was wonderful footage of Israelis and Iranians dancing together in the streets of London the other day with Persian flags and Israeli flags above them. I'm no fan of multiculturalism, but that's a form of multiculturalism I can get behind.
By the way, at the same time that leftist, wokist Brits are shouting at the Iranian exiles that they're stooges of Western imperialism for supporting the fall of the regime that means they can't go home. I mean, you can't make it up.
It is extraordinary. I was on air on GB News when the death of Khomeini was announced, and it threw to footage of Tehran, which I think has been verified, where there was just this incredible celebration in the streets, and I couldn't resist saying to the lefties on the panel, I think I can hear them. I think I can hear from the cheers. We want our international law. We want our due process. We want the UN to be involved. It just shows the disconnect, really, between the leftist elite class and what the actual Iranian people en masse really want. There are two potential barriers to that scenario that you laid out. Number one is if the Iranian people are to rise up, they need guns. So we saw only weeks ago in the most shocking and underreported, I would add, slaughter, at least 30,000, perhaps closer to 40 or 50,000 Iranians slaughtered by the regime, in large part because they didn't have weapons to defend themselves. And the second thing is that there isn't a coordinated opposition in Iran at the moment because it has been beaten down for so many years. How do you overcome those problems in order to seek regime change?
Look, there are several options. I note, for example, a report in CNN now that the CIA has been arming Kurdish Iranian factions in order to take up arms against the Iranian regime. The challenge will not necessarily come from student protests in Tehran, as it may from other parts of Iran. But President Trump is already saying that people are trying to defect. Because look, Israel killed 40 Iranian officials in the first 40 seconds of the war. We killed the commander of the Revolutionary Guards. He had only been in position since mid-June because Israel killed the previous head of the Revolutionary Guards. And he had only been in position for about 3 days because Israel killed his predecessor in the first wave of Operation Rising Lion. This is a regime where it is now suicidal to want any form of leadership role because Israeli planes control the skies, are tracking you through your traffic lights, and the United States is openly saying, anyone who threatens to kill Americans, we're going to hunt you down and we're going to kill you. So in that scenario, it is increasingly rational for people to seek to defect. And I hope that is the scenario that the United States is working on a transition that involves elements of the Iranian state choosing to defect because they know it is simply suicidal to stand up to the United States when it is threatening you, surrender or die. Lay down your weapons and receive total immunity, which is really generous, or continue fighting and face certain death, and it won't be pretty.
There are people who don't support this war. What would you say to them?
No one wants war, and that's why it's imperative to remove the Iranian regime's ability to continue waging a war of aggression. We've seen how the Iranian regime is lashing out, attacking hotels and apartment blocks and malls across the Gulf. Just imagine how dangerous it would be if it had 4 times as many ballistic missiles and nuclear weapons. War is a last resort, and this is the last resort. Iran was close to becoming untouchable. And then a fundamentalist lunatic regime would have built nuclear weapons with which to threaten and blackmail the West. So sometimes leaders have to do things that are deeply unpopular, that are challenging, but they have to do it because they're right, because they understand what the costs of doing nothing are. Right now, the costs of doing nothing would have been to clear a path for the Iranian regime to develop nuclear weapons and thousands of ballistic missiles. So world leaders can click their tongues, they can disapprove, they can hide behind Israel and the United States that are doing their dirty work for them by bombing the Iranian regime's ballistic missile launchers. But as an Israeli, all I can say is I'm proud that we're leading the way in making the world a safer place.
Eylon Levy, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you, Well. Pleasure as always.